Good day, distinguished participants and higher education stakeholders who have joined us here today. On behalf of the Secretary General of the Association of African Universities, Professor Etienne Ehuan Ehile, I warmly welcome you all to today's webinar. My name is Felicia Kwagbeji, and I'm the Communications and Publications Officer for the Association of African Universities. I'm indeed humbled to be the moderator at this important continental level webinar, where for the next 1.5 hours, we will be deliberating on the important subject of communicating strategically during a pandemic. We remain in very unstable and unsure period due to the COVID-19 outbreak. And as we all know, it's not only a health crisis, but among others, a sociocultural one, as well as an economic one. And this has affected every facet of society. Indeed, as stakeholders of African higher education institutions and universities, we've also had a fair share of its impact on our activities. And this time actually requires critical and strategic communications. It requires timely exchange of information between us and our publics. It's a time to ensure that our brand reputation, which we've taken years to build, doesn't collapse. It's also a time for communication teams to highlight the role of universities in supporting societies. It's even more critical for universities to also utilize the power of communication to strengthen their brand as they share information on their research and initiatives related to COVID-19. This webinar series is actually part of a bigger series that the AAU has been organizing on various themes for different stakeholders, students, vice chancellors, higher education regulators, and various stakeholders of higher education. For those who are new to the AAU, let me briefly take a second to introduce you to the association. I'll try to share my screen, if you would permit me just a minute. Can my screen be seen, please? Okay, so by way of introducing the association to those of us who are new to the AAU was established as an international non-governmental organization in 1967, which means come November this year, we'll be turning 53 years. We've been operating for that long. We're actually the apex higher education organization in Africa and the principal forum for consultation, exchange of information, and cooperation among universities in Africa. AU was created by the universities in Africa themselves, mainly to help promote collaboration among themselves and also between them and the international higher education community. Currently, we have a membership of 400 higher education institutions, and these are spread across the length and breadth of the continent. They are coming from the east of Africa, from Central Africa, from North Africa, from South, and then of course from West Africa. Of course, you realize that there are a lot more universities on the continent, but our membership is 400 as of now, because an institution needs to meet a specific criteria to qualify to join the association. We also have regional offices aside the headquarters, which is based in Accra, Ghana, where we are presenting this webinar from. We have regional offices in East Africa Regional Office. This is hosted by the University of Khartoum in Sudan. We also have the North Africa Regional Office, which is hosted by the Al-Azhar University located in Egypt. And then we have the North America Regional Office. The purpose of the North America Regional Office, which is located in Washington, D.C., it's mainly to help promote collaboration and work between us here on the continent and then the Africans in the diaspora. The AAU is mandated by the African Union Commission to lead higher education in Africa. We've been working with the African Union for a very long time, and we were actually appointed the coordinator to implement the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, which we call the CESA. I would like to end here and point you to other sources where you can locate more information on the AAU. So for our website, if you visit www.aau.org, you will find more information on us. Also, if you visit our blog at blog.aau.org, you'll find information on us. We are also social, so you'll find us on Facebook at Association of African Universities, and then at Twitter at AAU_67. We also have the AAU television, and we've been broadcasting and streaming and sharing information widely, which is mainly focusing on higher education. So if you visit tv.aau.org, you would have access to the AAU television. If you also rescan your TV in your room, in your houses, if you are yet to rescan, if you do a rescan, you will find us there as well. So mainly to take us back to the objective and the purpose of the webinar, we thought that it's actually good to create a platform to engage the public relation officers and communication officers across the continent. That's one of the key things that AAU has its strength in. We create the forum and create the platform for consultation, where higher education stakeholders come together and share knowledge, they share their lessons, they share experiences. So we actually usually host bigger platforms for even the vice chancellors. We have a Corivip which we host every 2 years, the Conference of Rectors, Vice Chancellors, and Presidents of African Universities. So it's what we are doing today is actually in line with what the AAU has been doing, which is creating the platform for us to engage with ourselves and then to share lessons. We also think that communication is a cost-cutting issue and it's a key skill that we all require to excel in various fields. So some of participants, some people have joined us who are not core communication officers or who are not public relation officers. But we think that this webinar is equally very vital for you because we need to learn as the PROs present, we need to learn from them on some of the key skills that we can learn to help us, better communicate. So on that note, at this point, I would like to stop sharing my screen and then call on the first presenter in the person of Ms. Nodumo Dhlamini, who is the Director of Communication, ICT, and Knowledge Management here at the Association of African Universities, so that she makes her presentation. Ms. Nodumo, if you are ready, may I request that you kindly take the floor, please?
Thank you, Felicia. I hope I'm audible now.
Yes, we can hear you, please.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone from Accra, Ghana. We are happy that you joined this webinar. We are excited because as an association, we would like to strengthen the community of people that deal with communications, public relations, and marketing within our universities, because we consider you as critical for the success of the missions or of the mission of your institution. So I would just like to situate this webinar within the continental framework or what we see as an association. As an association that takes care of universities across the continent, we see the role of the communications being very critical. As Felicia said, communication is important for branding institutions, for making sure the images of the universities are taken care of, for information dissemination to staff, parents, stakeholders, and others, and also for research support. So we consider the role of communication being central to everything that a university does. So we've been watching as the pandemic evolved, and we were thinking, how are communications, public relations, and marketing officers coping? Are they adapting their university communication strategies during this pandemic? Are they reviewing how they've been doing things so that we do things differently in order to take opportunities that are emerging and also to respond or to help our universities to respond appropriately. So in this webinar, we are hoping to hear more from the speakers that have been lined up in terms of how they are adapting their communication strategies and what they are doing differently. We expect our member institutions to be concerned about responsive communication. We expect communications directors, officers, marketing directors, officers, and PR staff to reflect on a number of things. To reflect on what has changed during the pandemic, how these changes have transformed their roles, We all know about the lockdowns, the campus closures, the students, staff working from home. We know about the fear and the uncertainty. We know also about the prevalence of online tools that have come to stay. So in this webinar and maybe follow-up webinars, we would like to really understand how you, as a pivotal person within the university, are practicing responsive communication, and whether you have the support to do that. And also to understand what we can do together at a continental level. We also see many opportunities, much as the pandemic has a number of negative aspects, but we prefer to also identify the opportunities. Let's remember that communication is cross-cutting, is not only for us, the comms officers, the marketing people, the PR people, but also it's relevant for academic staff. So you must be thinking about how do you upgrade your skills? How do you take advantage of some of the programs that are available for free online for improving your capacities? How do you guide staff and students remotely when you are not seeing them every day? What's your role in that space? How do you provide information to parents that are panicking, especially because some universities have decided to reopen and bring in some of the students back? So how do you manage that whole communication space? Can you play a role in training staff within your university? What can you do in terms of skills building for the stakeholders within your universities? What are the opportunities for profiling your institutions during this pandemic? Is your institution doing things that are worthy to be shared? Are you sharing them, or those things are still hidden? What new online tools have you discovered? Are you in control of the website, or is the website controlled by the technical people? What is your role in making sure information is updated frequently on social media, your website, your websites and other platforms? Are we spreading calm and not fear? So basically, that is what we are looking at as an association, and we look forward to hearing from the various universities that are represented here. Thank you so much. Felicia, thank you to you. I think I'm done. Thank you very much. I wish all of us a successful webinar.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nodumo Dhlamini, for your introductory remarks. I think at this point, if Dr. Abraham Mulwo is connected, I would like to call him to give his brief remarks. Dr. Abraham Mulwo will actually be presenting. He's one of the speakers to come later in the program. So when it is time, I will introduce him fully. But mainly, he's an associate dean at the School of Information Sciences at Moi University in Kenya. Is Dr. Mulwo on, please?
Yes,
you can take the floor.
Thank you very much, Felicia. First, I would like to thank Association of African Universities for inviting me to share ideas with my colleagues across the continent, and most importantly, to learn from their experiences and their observation regarding strategic communication in the era of COVID-19. In the absence of effective cure and vaccine for COVID-19, it is imperative that the focus is on prevention, and strategic communication is actually a necessity in this particular area. So we are here to share our ideas and experiences, as well as the knowledge that we have gained over the years and what we observe universities are doing. I am not public relations or a communication manager for the university, but I've been the head of Department of Communication Studies, and I'm a scholar in the field of communication. First of all, I would like to say that universities are a melting pot of ideas, people, and cultures. We have many students that we interact with in universities. We have colleagues from across the world sitting and working in our universities. And all of us are affected by COVID-19 in one way or the other. The closure of universities and reopening of other universities at the moment brings in a number of challenges that have been outlined by Felicia and Dhlamini as well. And therefore, critical and strategic communication is very necessary. I would also like to say that the world looks up to communication practitioners and scholars to provide leadership on issues relating to COVID-19, especially in this time when the cure or vaccine has not been developed. And universities are centers for research, knowledge creation, and dissemination. And what we do in universities provide a picture or provide some guidance to the rest of our communities. The world looks up to us as academics to provide leadership. Researchers in the medical schools in universities are providing leadership in researching for COVID-19, and therefore communication scholars also need to provide leadership through guiding on how we can develop strategic communication and implementing strategies in our institution that set example for the rest of the country. So those are just my few opening remarks. I'll talk about other issues when the time comes. Thank you, Felicia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mulwo, for your remarks as well. We look forward to hearing more from you when it's actually your turn to present. As we move on with the program, I would just briefly like to say that we shall have an opportunity for a question and answer session at the end of the presentations. But while the presentations are going on, please feel free to drop your questions where we have the chat box, and then we'll pick them up, and the presenters would actually respond to it as the session goes on or at the end of the session. To quickly move in, I would like to invite the next presenter in the person of Mrs. Stella Amoah. She is coming from the Public Affairs Directorate from the University of Ghana here in Accra, Ghana. I think we realized from the program that we are actually having speakers from across the continent. So we have speakers from West Africa, from South Africa, from North Africa, and the various regions from the continent. So we are sure that we would actually have a very rich discussion session. Without much ado, I'd like to call on Mrs. Stella Amoah to take up the stage and start her presentation. She can start by introducing herself, and then she starts sharing the University of Ghana experience with all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Felicia. Good morning to all colleagues across the continent and members of the Association of African Universities. My name is Stella Amoah, as has been rightly said. I work in the Public Affairs Directorate, spokesperson. I'm transiting between two jobs now, and I still work with the Public Affairs Directorate. In my former role, I was the spokesperson for University Affairs and had oversight for university functions and ceremonies, as well as corporate communications in the university. My presentation, the order of my presentation will focus primarily on providing a brief background of the University of Ghana, and I'll also provide a brief introduction to the topic strategies for communicating during a pandemic, communicating on COVID, how we communicated on COVID-19, strategies for communicating during the pandemic, what was different about communicating this time, what strategies worked and what strategies didn't work, how we went about media management, and then key lessons and tips. So a brief background of the University of Ghana. The University of Ghana was established in 1948. Our current student population is 53,000 plus, made up of non-degree, visiting students, bachelors, masters, and PhDs. We have 98.83% of Ghanaian students, with international students 1.17%. Our current employee strength is 6,551, made up of administrators, senior administrators and professionals, as well as our junior staff and faculty. In 2014, the university came up with a strategic plan, and our vision is to become a world-class research-intensive university over the next decade. So our strategic plan, our vision is from 2014 to 2024, and we continuously have a monitoring and evaluation team to revise and look at our strategic objectives and make amendments where necessary. We have a mission to create an enabling environment that makes the University of Ghana increasingly relevant to national and global needs through quality teaching and learning. Currently, our basic statistics in terms of gender, we have 53% males with 47% females. We are gradually getting to parity between male and female. And now to the topic. As the premier university in Ghana, it is not surprising that the spotlight is always on our institution. And even as we pride ourselves on this accolade, it means as a pace-setter institution of higher learning in Ghana and on the continent, our internists have to work at optimum level. Indeed, the pandemic disrupted the normal operations of the university. So consequently, we had to devise new strategies to communicate with our internal and external publics. With the university recording its first case of COVID-19 on March 12, 2020, management took a decision to cancel all lectures beginning Monday, March 16, 2020. But on the same day, by a presidential directive, all public and private schools, universities, and other tertiary institutions were closed until further notice. The university immediately set up an emergency response team chaired by a pro-vice chancellor and made up of scientists, researchers, medical practitioners, and administrators to make up the emergency response team. Immediately, a special briefing was organized during which the Vice Chancellor addressed members of the university community. This was broadcast and posted on both our traditional and social media platforms. Public Affairs prepared general notices, and this was issued to announce the closure of the university and other decisions that had been made by management. So these decisions were posted to our employee and student official email platforms, to all our social media platforms, and we also broadcast on the university's radio station. What was communicated during this time? First of all, to announce the closure of the university, and then also to relay the set of proactive measures that had been decided upon, such as facilities for screening, creation of quarantine zones, cancellation of events and conferences, ban on international travel, and the receiving and hosting of external visitors and guests to the university. Members of the community, both employees and students, were also advised to use technology to facilitate virtual meetings and other activities as much as possible. Did we create a special medium for communicating on COVID? As I said, we created our social media platforms, enhanced them, and more than that, members of the community were also assured that these measures would be periodically modified to keep up with the evolving trends of the pandemic. We also provided hotlines where members of the community can provide and receive information. We had to work as quickly as possible and in an urgent mode. We had to design flyers and posters to communicate information on COVID-19, the signs and symptoms to watch out for, safety and preventive measures. Some of our constituent units, such as the School of Public Health, also had to provide flyers, information on intervention, contact tracing interventions, etc. Everything that will provide as much information to members of our community as much as possible. We realized that some of our facilities also had to open in spite of the fact that there was a stay-at-home policy. When the stay-at-home policy was lifted by the government, we had to create a no face mask, no entry, flyers and posters for all our facilities, offices, and all facilities on campus. We also had to ensure that whatever safety and preventive measures that we had spoken about were physically adhered to, providing the hand sanitizers and all the PPEs that were important for members of our community. Our website also was kept alive, our homepage news, announcements. We also had to use our existing newsletters, news files to communicate to our internal publics. During this time, we created a special news file where we compiled all notices on COVID, as well as notices to our students and our employees, so that they can have in one publication everything that they needed to know. As I've said, our social media platform, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, was very much alive and active during this time. In cases where we needed to issue press releases, we had to undertake that. For example, when scientists from our Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research and WACBIP, West Africa Center for Cell Biology and Infectious Pathogens, successfully sequenced the whole genome of COVID-19 viruses from 15 infected cases in Ghana, we acknowledged that this was good news to share not only to our community, but to the world at large. And we issued a press release. This was a proud moment for the University of Ghana amidst the pandemic. And we communicated that through a press release. We also issued another press release when all the university's primary contacts of the reported COVID-19 patient from the university tested negative for the coronavirus after going through the mandatory 14-day period of quarantine. We thought that that was very good news to share, because there was a lot of negative reportage in spite of the proactive measures we took to calm or to quell these fears. Also, when our School of Pharmacy joined the national effort to produce alcohol-based hand sanitizers, which were approved and registered by the Food and Drugs Authority. We communicated that for people to know what the university was doing. These are just a few examples of what the university did, that is in terms of issuing press releases. So what strategies did we communicate during the period of the strategies we used for communicating during the period of the pandemic? Our core stakeholders are the students. So with the closure of the university, we started virtual meetings to look at how lectures would continue. When a decision was taken to resort to online teaching and learning, virtual meetings were held with the student leadership, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, to discuss this with them. Notices went out to members of the university community, and we also created a complaint and feedback platform. We used all our traditional and social media for this information. We also had frequent communication on the online teaching and learning, because even though the students were away, we used all these platforms to engage them. And it was a very active time. That was the time we realized the need for information, because our students and our community needed that. And the email platform and our social media platforms were very much alive during this time. As I said, we communicate also on examination schedules using all these platforms. We created a special news file, which I've also mentioned. That was a compilation of all notices, because we realized that sometimes some members of the community miss the notices when we send them out. So what we did is to compile all these notices, put them in one publication, and then issue them from time to time. And this has become a repository for us and anybody to follow on anytime. Our virtual meetings with student leaders also was very successful. Daily and weekly, monthly notices and updates to members of our communities, that is our students, faculty, senior administrators, and other employees, as well as the active email. And we were fortunate that we also have a university radio station, which was also very active. Our virtual meetings, all our statutory meetings of boards and committees, other departmental, unit and administrative meetings were held virtual. A key achievement, I must say, was the maiden virtual congregation ceremony or graduation ceremony we held at the end of July. And we hope to share our ideas on this with colleagues from the other universities who have made this request. A lot of our sister universities in Ghana were so excited with what we put up. And as a pace-setter university, we are willing to share how we were able to hold a successful maiden virtual graduation ceremony. So what was different about communication during this time? In fact, the term 24/7 became truly alive this time. Public affairs worked and is working around the clock. The regular working hours appears to be non-existent anymore. We find ourselves sometimes working at 1 a.m., sending notices, even though when we were working on site or physically, it was different. We also had
Sorry for interrupting, Mrs. Amon. Please, you have 3 more minutes left. Thank you so much.
I'm almost done. So we had to painstakingly edit our publications to ensure that no negative and unintended meaning is inferred in the notices we send out. So accuracy in messaging, prompt messaging, then targeting communication so that we distinguish between those that goes to employees and what goes to students, and then also using the right channels. So what strategies worked? We've realized that our online teaching was largely successful. We also realized from the feedback platform that our students were, we provided information in a timely and reliable manner, the interdependence of our various units working together, and also the visible reminders minimized infection rates on our campuses. Which strategies didn't work so well? Access to internet was a real challenge. And then we realized also that insufficient orientation and training made the beginning difficult for those who were not IT savvy. We continue to engage with the media. And when the first case was reported, we tried as much as possible to engage the media by way of our press releases, which I have mentioned earlier. Even though we had a few challenges, we realized that the virtual communication provided an alternative to face-to-face meetings to minimize operational disruptions. So what key lessons or tips? We realized that short and precise messaging is preferable for our students and employees. As communicators, we need to exercise and exhibit a high sense of professionalism in the advice we give and actions we take on our institution's behalf. Our knowledge, skills, and experience should let us know which of the options and platforms and channels are excellent for our publics. In keeping our internal publics abreast of what is happening in our institutions, we should also be mindful of our external publics who need to know at least what we are doing in these uncharted times, because they will be the same people we will go to after the storm is over. So colleagues, let's ensure we regularly update our alumni and friends alike, our former officials and employees, government, our major stakeholder, service providers, our sister universities and institutions in our countries and abroad, as well as our benefactors. They have been and will continue to be our institution's best advocates. So we must always communicate with them. I now end my presentation and thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Amwa, for that rich presentation. I think we've learned a lot of tips from your presentation. I've already started seeing some questions coming in, but we would pick it up later as the presentation goes on. I think we are doing very badly with time. I would like to encourage all the speakers to kindly be cautious of it and make the presentation within the assigned time frame. Going on, I would like to call on the next presenter to respectfully take over and do the presentation. The next presenter is in the person of Lecia Loda, who will be giving us the case study from the University of the Free State from South Africa. Lecia Loda is the Director for Communication and Marketing at the University of the Free State. She's an international award-winning communication specialist and a member of the International Association of Business Communicators, as well as the Council for Advancement and Support of Education. She reports directly to the Vice Chancellor and has been in this field for a very long time. Without taking much of the time, I would like to invite Lecia Loda to take over and make her presentation. Thank you.
Felicia, Lecia is on mute. We can't hear her.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can now.
Thank you. Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you to the AAU. It's really a pleasure for me to talk to you from South Africa. Also to my colleagues in South Africa who's also on the webinar this afternoon. Thank you so much also for dialing in. I'm weary of the time, so I'm going to get right into my presentation. It will also be shared afterwards. So as Felicia has indicated, I am Director of Communication and Marketing. I serve on the executive team of the University of the Free State. Now, South Africa has got 26 higher education institutions, of which University of the Free State is one. We are situated in the center of South Africa, in Bloemfontein, which is also the judiciary capital of the country. The university is one of the oldest universities in the country. We were established in 1904. We've got 3 campuses, 2 in Bloemfontein and 1 in the Eastern Free State on our Kwakwa campus. We have 7 faculties and about 41,600 students. Then in terms of our COVID journey, so I think, and that's one thing that I've also picked up now in the past few months, we all have a journey that we have taken as universities. Different some, but we are, yes. So our COVID journey also started about 6 months into our academic year, which started in January. The national lockdown in South Africa started on the 26th of March with level 5. We are now on level 3 of the lockdown. Also indicated previously in the previous speaker, our classes were also suspended, our residences were evacuated, events cancelled or postponed, graduation ceremonies postponed, and we also could not travel nationally or internationally. We are now also still restricted in terms of travel to move across our provinces. So challenges in terms of this, for where we are now in terms of our journey, that includes that at the University of the Free State and also in general in South Africa, a lot of our students study on bursaries of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. At the University of the Free State, more than half of our students are on this bursary scheme. They do experience connectivity challenges, issues with data and devices, and also sometimes our students don't have conducive learning and living environments, and that we also picked up now with the lockdown. The University of the Free State started in April this year with an emergency remote online teaching model. Our staff are also working from home, most of them, although we've started taking some of our students back also to campus. We trained just over 1,000 of our academic staff to actually work online in emergency remote teaching. And then also in terms of my own team, we also then also started working in terms of our own crisis communication plan. Now, just as much as our journey has given us some challenges, it's also given us a lot of opportunities. And that to me is also the big thing, always to see what kind of opportunities come out of something like, for instance, a crisis, or in this case, a global pandemic. Now, the first thing I think with universities in South Africa across the board is our agility and our resilience to deal with crisis. And that I've seen also across board in terms of universities and also across the continent as well, how we deal with crises. Then also in terms of multifunctional teamwork across business units, that's actually also amazing how that's come out, how we actually just integrated our work and how we started just to support each other also, from HR to our Center for Teaching and Learning to our ICT and so forth. Then also the university executive also decided right from the start with COVID that we will have a centralized communication model. So all communication at the University of the Free State has been centralized in terms of the corporate communication to my office. So we curate, we put it together, and then we disseminate as well in our different communication platforms. Then also executive functions and weekly reporting. I report on a weekly basis to the executive. Then in terms of enhancement of communication processes, now that for instance includes We have established a very strong social media strategy, and I've got an excellent social media team also to actually deal with that. And 24/7, they monitor platforms, they make sure that everything is okay in terms of our social media. Also then the use of our communication platforms such as SMS, our website, also then the COVID-19 awareness campaign where we use we've developed the fast guides for staff and students. We also measure our work quite frequently to ensure that we still stay on message, that our stakeholders still hear what the university has to say. Then also in terms of skills development, that includes also technology. So we all had to learn and expand our technological skills in terms of webinars, meetings and so forth, and also in terms of the roles and the responsibilities in my team actually also have expanded a lot, and my team members are also starting to work in different roles now, also to support the team and the university. Then stakeholder engagement, that has also increased. Our stakeholder engagement is very strong. We communicate constantly with staff, students, alumni, parents, guardians, donors, industry partners, our council, our student representative council, international students, our unions, the media, and so forth. And that is, we've also had a lot of accolades in terms of how we deal with our stakeholders. Then just briefly in terms of after this, what are we planning for the future? What do we see we have to do now going forward? And the one thing for South Africa in general is that our peak is only, the national peak is in August, September. That is also in terms of predictions. Our second semester for the university will start on the 1st of September. So we moved our whole academic program on. We have a risk of bringing our staff and students back, a risk of them also becoming sick, and also then in terms of that risk around health and safety. Then our academic calendar has been extended until the 21st of December. That is when we actually plan to maybe finish our year, and then only then our exams, our additional exams continue. Then we do have a risk in terms of the uptake of first year students, because our grade 12s will only get their results in February next year. So the university is already planning to see how we can actually mitigate that with taking in students, first year students later in the year. Then just briefly in terms of the South African landscape, in terms of where we are also heading, the universities in general are looking at online versus remote emergency learning, and maybe to continue in a way also with still presenting classes online, even when our lockdown is lifted. And then also we do have challenges in terms of free education and expectations around that from our student environment. Then student advocacy also, will it be stronger, will it be less? We have experienced also in the social media space that students actually also now use social media also in terms of a protest mechanism. For instance, the university experienced a phase now when we trended on Twitter with the use of bots and so forth also. So that was also a challenge for us. Then in terms of the University of the Free State itself, we have to relook what is our value proposition, what is our narrative, and how we must probably have to adapt it now after with the pandemic. Then our stakeholder engagement, also to see how we can elevate our stakeholder engagement, to see and to keep on bringing stakeholders to the university. We are also looking at a new business model to see perhaps in terms of flexible HR models, staff working from home, and how we can actually have our model also adapting to where the world is in terms of the pandemic and the outflow of that. Then the utilization of technology, that's also something that the university is having a look at. And then financial constraints. Now, we've all seen that in terms of the economy, in terms of the challenge that's around that with our country, but also across the world. We are also looking at financial constraints. And another interesting element is also the co-creation conversations with industry. So we're trying to establish from industry how we can actually support each other in terms of moving forward and taking also the country forward. Then just lastly, in terms of my team, what we are looking at going forward, what we are thinking around. The first thing is relevancy. We are having constant conversations in terms of how we can maintain and keep ourselves relevant going forward as a communication and marketing department, but also supporting the university. Then also the digital approach to stakeholder management, and then our people-centric focus to also keep on finding ways also to enhance our digital environment. Then the other big aspect or important aspect is you cannot over communicate. We still have to maintain our engagement with everyone. We have to keep on communicating. And then our experience in crisis communication has elevated tremendously. And again, I want to give accolades to my team for that as well, and also to the university in general. And then also new technologies, breaking down of silos, that has also been very effective also at the university. And then, as I said again, the new business models that we are also looking at. So thank you very much, Felicia. That's in brief from the University of the Free State. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Lecia, for that very informative presentation. I'm just looking at some of the comments which have come up in the box, and on your presentation, I see things like interesting, things like brilliant. So participants are actually enjoying your presentation. And thanks for reminding us to also look at our institution's value proposition and ensure that our communications are relevant at all times. Thanks so much once again. At this time, I would like to quickly invite the next speaker, who would be presenting to us the case from Egypt in the person of Professor Dr. Mahmoud El-Sabahi. He is the director of the Badr University in Cairo Science Academy. He has been the assistant director of the Laboratory for Synthetic Biologic Interactions at Texas A&M University. And he's also been the editor of the Journal of Toxicology. As we can see, he's not mainly or he's not purely a communications or public relations officer. And you'd agree with me that some of us are on the call who are also researchers. So it will be interesting to hear things from his perspective as well. If Prof is ready, would like to hear from you now. Thanks so much.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Felicia, for this nice intro, and thanks for everyone and for the African Association of Universities for this kind invitation and for the opportunities of the to bring together the African universities to share lessons and strategies for effective communication. So as Felicia mentioned, that I'm not like specialist in the communication, but I'll share like the talk from my perspective. First of all, Badr University in Cairo has been established in 2013 to offer various programs and degrees. It is located in Badr City. It's about 40 kilometers from Cairo. It encompasses about 16 schools and offers 84 programs, placing the university on the top of the Egyptian private universities. It is the house for about 10,500 undergrad students from different nationalities, about 500 faculty members and 600 associated staff members. So first of all, I mean, from my perspective, a bit in first in the beginning of the pandemic, either here at BUC or in Egypt or everywhere in the world, it was a little bit confusing. I mean, like we see everywhere, like stay home, stay safe, stay alert, but at the same time, like to communicate effectively and communicate responsibly. And it is, I mean, it's not that easy. It's very challenging how to stay safe and stay home and at the same time communicate effectively. And I think the whole world was not prepared really well before the pandemic. Surprisingly, I found this article. It was published in 2011. at that time about the H1N1 and how people should communicate. And the main message from this article is that the electronic communication is the most efficient way for delivering message and for communication. However, I think even since that time in 2011, I mean, we were not really ready till the recent pandemic. In another article published by the QS ranking system, also I like very much this perspective. They mentioned that it's really challenging to retain prospective student interest. So most people think that it is really challenging to communicate effectively, but I mean, this is for already enrolled students, but for future students or prospective students, it's really very challenging to retain the interest, because I mean, for some students it was the first year and they haven't been already engaged in the university. So just communicating online or through different platforms, as we will mention, it was really very challenging. During the COVID-19 pandemic, several universities found variety of ways to communicate with the faculty and staff members and students. The effective communication was challenging, and I think it will play very important role in shaping the future education. And I also think that because it is essential and every university has to develop their own communication strategies, so it will be one of the pillars in the global ranking system of the university in the future. As my colleagues mentioned in the previous presentations, there could be different types of communication strategies through either email or social media, Twitter, or other platforms for video conferencing. However, I wanted to mention some of the possible negative effects of the poor communication. So, I mean, it's not only to communicate effectively, but poor communication can result in several possible side effects or negative effects, even some of them are mild, like annoyance or inconvenience for some people, but they could also influence the reputation of the university, which could simply happen either because of the message, the intended message is interpreted differently. I mean, because when you communicate online, it's different from face to face, or when they are received by the unintended recipients. At Badr University in Cairo, all the classes and lectures are fully equipped with the means that we need, like projector and computers and speakers that we need for communication with either students or faculty members, and they are accessible through different devices. The communication in my university, at 3 levels, because some people think communication is only from faculty to students. It is from faculty to students, and also from the administration of the university to the faculty and staff members and to students, and between the top management of the university and different administration bodies. So similar tools have been used, different video conferencing platform. For students, the way of communication was mainly the learning management system that has been already established. So we were lucky that we already have this system installed and used by the university, because few universities were using that one, because I mean, face-to-face communication could be easier, but this system has been installed in our university since a long time. But the intensity that we are using increased a lot at the COVID-19 pandemic. That's why one of my main conclusion items that I will mention is that preparation is a key. So it's not only when you have a situation or an urgent or emergency situation, you have to prepare. I mean, you have to be already well prepared. We use a learning management systems that allow interaction between faculty and staff, allow to track different activities from faculty members and students, and also allow to send notifications. So it makes things much easier, but still there are several challenges, as I have mentioned. So in conclusion, I mean, there are very important items in my perspective that we have to be aware and we have to prepare to, that the situation and official rules and guidelines can change from one day to another. And we already have seen that. We have to maintain open lines of communication with employees and with students. As I have mentioned, preparation is a key. I think it's time now to prepare really well for all possibilities and to have the required equipment and infrastructure that are necessary for effective communication. Retaining the prospective students' interest is really a challenge that we have to think about it. It's not only through effective communication. I think we need other more efficient strategies to retain the interest of those students. Also, we have to consider the possible negative effects of poor communication. As I have mentioned, I mean, they can really, and even in my personal experience, what I have seen here at the university, at the beginning of COVID-19, many students will even complain. I mean, because even if the communication is effective, but when students are not used to it, they will start to complain. So we have, as I mentioned, we have to adapt, we have even to modify or comply with the requirements, and there has to be some flexibility to respond to their questions or to their recommendations. My last point is, for me, is also a very important point. Some people would think, or even some leaders or even some faculty members would think that because they are communicating online or through different online platform, that it has more flexibility, or they are not responsible for the message they are delivering. Regardless of the communication style or method, every message or post appeared from the university or from the faculty member must comply to the institutional rules and regulation and all possible legal and regulatory requirements, and also internal approval process. It's not like just chatting with some people or responding to some inquiries. I mean, it has to be efficient and regulated, because students will receive those messages as rules or as something that they have to follow. So we have to be very careful when communicating with different categories, either students or faculty and staff members. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor, for making that very educative presentation. People are asking if we can have access to the presentation. So after the webinar, I would write to all the speakers and get the presentation so that we can share with all participants.
Yes, of course.
At this point, okay, thanks so much. At this point, we'd like to move on to the next speaker, who will be presenting the case study from the Moi University in Kenya. He's in the person of Dr. Abraham Kiprop Mulwo. Dr. Abraham Mulwo is the Associate Dean, School of Information Sciences and Senior Lecturer of Development Communication at the Moi University, where he has taught since 2004. Until recently, he served as a member of the Task Force on Improving Government Information and Public Communication. Dr. Mulwo, if you are ready, I would like to hand over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again. I would like to start by saying that I'll not be speaking more about Moi University communication, especially because I don't work in the communications office of the university. But I'll be talking more about what we have learned as researchers and specialists in the area of communication in Kenya. I'll be drawing on what we have observed, together with some of the ideas we've shared with colleagues in the field of communication here in Kenya and across the region in East Africa. But also I'll be talking about some of the things that I've observed, not only in Moi University, but also in the universities in the region. Now, first of all, COVID-19 evolved rapidly from the time we heard about it the first time in China to the time that it started in Africa and spread very rapidly. And it tells us something about the need for universities to not only to develop crisis communication, but also to be able to conduct drills and ensure their preparedness in their capacity to be able to handle situations, emergency situations such as COVID-19. In Kenya, and especially in Moi University, decision was made by the government to close all public institutions. And therefore, our communication had to be aligned to the government communication. The communication office had to act very swiftly to communicate with management and communicate the management decision to the stakeholders, that is including the students, including the staff, and other stakeholders on the decision to close the university, and issue a communication that further information will be given thereafter. And this, what we learned from this kind of scenario is that universities need to be prepared for such crisis. And COVID-19 gives us a good case study or good lesson for us to learn about our preparedness to communicate crisis and the need to conduct drills. Secondly, we also learned that communication strategy needs to be dynamic, to be adaptive to the changing circumstances. When we look at COVID-19 and how it has evolved and the kind of information that is emerging rapidly, you realize that we need to align our communication strategy to the changing environment, and we need to adapt it to the changes in the environment that we are dealing with. A lot of information is coming in, there's a lot of fake news that is coming in, and there's need to be able to have a strategy that is adaptive to these kind of changes. Also, one of the things that we learn from observing what has been going on in the higher education sector, and also at the national level, is that information sources are changing rapidly. We're having social media and new media technologies that are bringing in opportunities for sharing information, and in most cases, misinformation and fake news. Again, this calls for a communication strategy that takes note and provides counter communication to misinformation and to fake news. The communications departments need to be activated, to be on the lookout constantly, to be able to counter these kind of informations. If, as a dean right now, associate dean at the university, I constantly get communication from my students asking for clarification about some information circulating in social media. In some instances, if people even fake official letters that they claim to be coming from the university saying that graduation will be conducted online, for instance, or exams will start on such and such a date. And you get students asking us for clarification because we are their point of contact. And we, as management of the university, we need to be in touch with the communications office, and for them to be able to constantly issue timely and accurate information to counter the misinformation and the fake news. Absence of communication is a good breeding ground for rumors and misinformation, and therefore communication professionals and communications departments in universities need to constantly study or engage with their stakeholders, understand what are their communication needs, understand what is happening, and be able to communicate effectively on what is going on. For instance, students want to know when are they resuming classes? Is only online teaching going to take place? Is online graduation going to take place? We have international students who have different needs, who are traveling from other countries. They have different needs, and all these needs proper communication. So there is need for the communications department in institutions of higher learning to be prepared and to have the correct information and to be able to combat rumors and misinformation. Providing feedback mechanism for the various stakeholders is also very critical. Communication is dialogue in essence, and therefore we must also keep the dialogue ongoing, so that we create a platform where students are able to engage with the university institutions, the other stakeholders, including the donors, the funders, the collaborators in the various projects, are able to get back to university and keep the dialogue going. And the communications department need to provide this platform, and they need to ensure that that dialogue is continuous. I also want to talk about the need, and I think my previous speakers have talked about it, the need for proper stakeholder mapping so that we can formulate effective engagement strategies for all these stakeholders. As I said earlier, universities are a melting pot of different cultures, different ideas, different people, different types of stakeholders who require different kinds of information. And there is need for communications departments to be able to do a proper stakeholder mapping, understand what are the communication needs, understand what are the effective channels of engaging with the various stakeholders, understand how to present that information in a timely manner and to address their information needs. We also need to do proper audience segmentation because the kind of audience that we deal with in institutions of higher learning, also as I've said earlier, vary. And these have various information needs. They have media access that is different. For our case in Kenya, we have students who live in rural areas. My university, for example, services students who come from across the country. There are those who live in remote areas. There are those who live in urban areas. There are those who live in areas where ICT infrastructure is well developed. But there are also those who live in areas where the ICT infrastructure is not well developed. All of them have information needs. And communications department need to figure out how do you reach all this. And one of the biggest lessons we have learned, and I have heard people talk about ICT providing avenues, one of the biggest lessons that COVID-19 has told us is that mainstream media, especially radio, is still king when it comes to communication. Because number one, it reaches a widest variety, but also many people look at the mainstream media for clarity, to clarify information because of a lot of misinformation and the fake news in the new media technologies that we are using at the moment. Importantly, there is need for communication coherence and consistency so that messages are coordinated in a manner that avoids confusion. Universities need to align their communication to the national communication. In Kenya, for example, we have centralized our communication to the Ministry of Health, which is giving regular updates on what is happening with regards to COVID-19. And all our messages, including the ones that we communicate in university in relation to COVID-19, are aligned to the national messaging. Now, also within universities, there are various stakeholders in universities and there are various levels of management. As I said, for example, I'm an associate dean. I have students contacting me, asking me about various things. And we need, as a university, to have a centralized system of controlling information. And this information should be shared with all the key players so that one message, there is coherence in the way we communicate. So that if a student is asking me about whether we are starting online teaching, for example, I should be able to give the same answer as an associate dean in another school, as the head of department in another department, as the communication person in the university. So that there should be a way in which communication is centralized and is coordinated so that we have coherence and consistency in the way we are communicating. There's a risk in adopting these ICT solutions. Of course, they are an important avenue for communicating, and it creates a unique platform, especially when dealing with younger people, especially our students. But again, it's a breeding ground for infodemic and misinformation. There's a lot of information that is shared that is incorrect, and that I have given an example where students are able to fake documents, write official letters with signatures that are forged, maybe scanned from other documents and imposed on fake documents and circulated among the student WhatsApp groups and other social media platforms. So we need to be aware of these challenges that are created by social media technologies and create ways of handling some of this misinformation. So as I conclude, I want to say that COVID-19 has presented for us a unique space as communication scholars to cover our space. Much of the challenges that you've heard about communication, whether in various organizations, in universities, communications department, there's always a complaint that institutions don't take the communications department seriously. COVID-19 provides for us a space as communicators to cover our space, to demonstrate the worth of effective communication, and to create a space whereby in future institutions will place communication in the rightful place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mulwo, for giving us that detailed presentation on what is happening in Kenya in terms of communication. I think we've learned a lot from you and from all the other speakers as well. Honorable and distinguished participants, I think you would agree with me that we are actually not doing so well in terms of timekeeping. And so with your permission, we want to kindly request that we extend the presentation by 30 more minutes and close at 1 o'clock instead of 12:30 GMT. You would also agree with me that the discussions are very interesting and we are learning a lot. So I've seen that most of us have stayed on throughout the presentation. So in order not to rush the presenters and in order that we also have time for Q&A session where you can ask all your questions, we are humbly pleading that you stay on with us and we extend it by 30 minutes more. If we finish it earlier, then that is fine for us. Thanks so much. So on that note, would like to take the next presentation, which is not a case study from an institution, but a presentation on crisis communication. And this will be done by Mr. Damasike Chibali, who would be making the presentation from Zambia. Mr. Chibali is the manager of public relations for the University of Zambia. He has 15 years of experience in public relations and communication practice. He's also the communication officer for the Africa Center of Excellence for Infectious Disease of Humans and Animals, ACEDA, which is a World Bank funded project at the University of Zambia. If Mr. Chibali is ready, would like to take your presentation on crisis communication, please. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Felicia. Let me share the presentation on the screen. I hope my colleagues are able to see. Okay, so fellow participants, I will just want to thank the AAU for this privilege and also for your time. You had very important activities to attend to, but you find part of your time to be part of this webinar on strategies for communicating during a pandemic. And we want to thank you and also want to take this privilege and make good use of it. My presentation, fellow participants, is on crisis communication, which I refer to as thinking ahead. And the overview of my presentation, I'll do the introduction, then we'll look at definition of key concepts, and then we'll look at how we can prepare for a crisis by looking at the stages and the strategies that we can actually utilize, and then we shall conclude the presentation. So why do we need crisis communication? The point is we all live in a potentially eruptive environment. And as such, events may come unexpectedly and disrupt the smooth operations of our institutions, even sometimes communities and nations, as the case is with the COVID-19. And so we need to design certain measures that we need to put in place to mitigate the impact of such events. And this calls for us as institutions and particularly as communicators and public relations practitioners to actually start anticipating these events. How do we do so? By coming up with crisis communication plans, crisis management plans. Why do we need to go to that extent? Because we need to safeguard the reputation and the image of institutions. In the nutshell, what this crisis communication plan is all about is what we always, prevention is better than cure. Now, let's define some of the key concepts. What is a crisis? You find there are a lot of definitions and the scholars will define them according to their area of specialization. But in all this definition, you find the key thing that a crisis is a significant threat, and to a large extent attract extensive news media coverage. And that's where the danger lies. Why are we referring to a crisis as a threat? Because it has a potential damage to the institution, to the community, stakeholders, and the industry. And we can find that the crisis has three related threats. That is public safety, financial loss, and reputation. And we can see it right now as we are going through the pandemic period. A lot of the members of the public are put on alert to ensure that public safety is maintained. What about financial losses? These are very apparent. Certain companies and institutions have scaled down their operations. Some have actually closed down, and reputation of some of those institutions have been hard hit in the way that they have handled the pandemic. Now, crisis communication. This is a concerted effort that is undertaken to communicate with the all stakeholders, the media, during the crisis. What about crisis management? This is a process of preparing for and responding to an unexpected event. And so we can see why we need to prepare. And you can see also, before I can proceed further, that there's a difference, slight difference between crisis communication as well as crisis management. Crisis communication is what you do during the communication or during the crisis. Whereas crisis management is an ongoing process. It starts from the time when you're anticipating any crisis up to the end of the crisis, and it goes beyond. So that's why it's called a process. It's an ongoing exercise. Now let's come to preparing for a crisis. We have 3 stages of a crisis, and we'll go stage by stage and highlight some of the strategies that we need to implement. The first stage is the pre-crisis or pre-incident stage. So in the first stage, you are anticipating a crisis, looking at the business that you are involved in. So you are trying to say that, for example, a fire breaks out. What about terrorism? What about a flood? What about a disease outbreak like the pandemic has come? How are we going to handle this as an institution? How are we going to communicate? So this is to understand those circumstances that can erupt into a crisis. You need to do a situation analysis. You can either use a SWOT or PESTEL. Then you need and a plan. And then you must constitute a crisis communication and management team. This is a team that are going to lead all the efforts, all the strategies, the activities that you must actually perform during the crisis to mitigate the negative impact. And then within that, you need to select and train a spokesperson or spokespersons. I'll give an example. In our country, Zambia, the spokesperson for the government is the Minister of Information. But because of the nature of the crisis, the pandemic, the COVID-19, the Minister of Health has been designated as a spokesperson. We'll learn the reasons why you have to select a particular person to be a spokesperson for any particular crisis that may happen. You also need to develop a list of contacts of key stakeholders, for example, the police, hospital, government agencies, the media, fire brigade in case of fire, the university council, senate, and so on and so forth. And then you should also set resources for such a crisis. Like, there should be material, funds, and the human resource. You need to prepare your people for any eventualities of a crisis. And then you also need to develop holding statements. What are these holding statements? These should be short statements, either to refute or to confirm that your institution has been hit by a crisis. And then you state that more details will be given. What you're trying to say is that you must give real-time information to members of the public and all your stakeholders. So in a crisis, timely information is very key. And then you must also identify your audience and choose communication channels that can reach them. Now we come to stage 2, crisis incident. Now you are actually dealing with an actual crisis situation. So what should you do? You have to assemble the crisis communication management team that your area established, and then make sure that you make calls to your contacts. For example, the hospital, the police, the fire brigade. For example, in the case of the COVID, we have the multi-sectoral approach or team. So each team has to play a part. And then you must trigger the crisis communication plan to manage the information flow during the crisis. Then you must handle the media very clearly. What do we mean here? We must send clear and consistent messages to the media. We must also hold regular briefings, and we must be factual in the way that we are transmitting the information. During the crisis also, as I mentioned earlier, you need to select your spokesperson. In some cases, these should be experts in the field of the crisis. In this case, like I mentioned in Zambia, the Minister of Health is a spokesperson, is the one who has been given the mandate to give factual and official information on the COVID cases, the contact tracing, and every information that has to do with the COVID-19. And the spokesperson should be positive in the way that they communicate the information so that they inspire and instill hope. Then during the COVID-19, we've seen that relief has been provided to people that are affected, such as the medical care, food, shelter, and in some cases, even clothing are given. So we need to provide some relief during a crisis because people are affected, businesses are affected. We have seen, like in Zambia, government making some financial and economic pronunciations or decisions to help companies to remain afloat. All those are part of the relief that should be extended to the people that are affected. But about the employees in our institutions, they also need to be engaged because they're affected. They need, some of them may need counseling. For example, patients of COVID-19 who have recovered, they'll need counseling. We also need to ensure that we explain to our employees about the impact of the crisis, the course of actions, and the measures taken. The third stage, the post-crisis or the aftermath. What activity or strategy should be implemented? You need to assess the situation. You must know and understand the impact on your operation, on your finances, your reputation, what was done right or wrong, how best will it be done next time. Then document lessons learned, and then review your budget allocation for crisis communication. Embark on repair, which means you need to repair your reputation as an institution by engaging in public relations campaign. You also need to repair the loss of business or market share by engaging in marketing campaigns. You also need to actually repair infrastructure. For example, in the case of earthquake, floods, terrorists, and other activities, fire, these do affect buildings. So all those should be activities or strategies that might be compensate to the people that have been affected. And if you pledge anything during the crisis period, it will be prudent and it makes business sense for the institution to meet all legal obligation and also compensate the people. Evaluate your crisis communication plan. It is an ongoing thing. You want to understand some of the things that you did right and some of the things that you did not do good. So why do you have to evaluate your crisis communication plan? According to Sebrel, conducting a comprehensive assessment is a starting point to identify gaps and design that is going to help you in the planning, and in the event that you have another crisis, you'll be able to handle it effectively and in real time. So in conclusion, I want to quote fair.
Hello, Dr. Chibali. Okay, we seem to have lost him, but he has actually come to the end of his presentation. Mr. Chibali, are you done, please?
Yes, I'm around. I can hear you.
Okay, so please round up.
Hello, Felicia.
Yes, we lost you a bit, but since you are back now, kindly proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. I think I should have been at the point of embarking on the aftermath. Let me just quickly go to the page that I wanted to share with you. Yeah, so I was trying to say that after the aftermath, you may realize that there are certain things that we need to do. For example, we need to embark on repair of our reputation. And we said we need to engage in public relations campaign, loss of business, a market share. We need to engage in marketing campaigns, infrastructure in case of a fire, in case of an earthquake, you need to repair those buildings that have been affected. And also we needed to fulfill the pledges that we made during the crisis. For example, if the crisis was caused by the negligence of the institution, we need to ensure that the people that are affected are compensated accordingly. And then we also need to evaluate our crisis communication plan. Why should we evaluate our crisis communication plan? It's because we want to identify gaps and also the design that we have used in coming up with a more effective communication plan in future. In conclusion, I would like to quote the words of Benjamin Franklin, which says, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. So in crisis communication, you are basically preparing not to fail when the crisis strikes. So we should not become reactive to a crisis. Effective institution management requires that we prepare effectively. We should look ahead and see a crisis that can come up. So from time to time as institutions and as public relations practitioners, communication experts, we must be scanning our environment so that we can see any signs of a crisis. Thank you for your rapt attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chibali, for that presentation. I think we've learned a lot from you. In that it's a presentation, but we've been citing practical examples from the country and from your university to support this. We are very grateful for this presentation. At this point, I would like to call on our last presenter, who would be making a presentation on brand communication. And the presenter is in the person of Dr. Mrs. Juliana Akushika Ando, who is a principal marketing consultant with over 13-year experience across industries and has over 10 years teaching experience. She is currently a lecturer at the prestigious University of Professional Studies, Accra in Ghana. She has taught several courses such as brand management, principles of marketing, customer relationship management, among several others. If Dr. Juliana Kushika Ando is ready, you may please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Hello. Thank you for your time.
We can hear you.
Thank you all for your time, and thanks to AAU for the opportunity. And I'll be presenting on staying relevant with your brand communication during the, I'll first of all start with a brief introduction to what brand communication is all about. I would also look at some areas to focus on during the pandemic when communicating your brands, and then also steps to effective brand communication. So these are the three main areas I'll be highlighting on. Brand communication is a combination of activities that influences customers' opinions of our brands, our institutions, our universities, our products. And brand communications usually begins with clarity of a brand strategy, brand communication strategy. And when we talk of the brand communication strategy, what is it? It's basically identifying who you are as a brand. Who are you as a brand? Secondly, communicating or coming out with the brand's goals, the goals of the brand. And thirdly, identifying who the target audience are, who will you be communicating to. Fourth, you also need to pay attention to what your competitors are doing. After that, which should be in line with your goal. As you have developed your communication, there's also the need for you to make sure that you have delivered the right information to the right person at the right time. And then as the presenter before me said, you need to evaluate. So that is the last thing you need to do. You need to evaluate. So as communicators, as PR persons, we need to understand that the underlying principle in brand communication is for us to have a brand strategy. And it was very evident from all the presenters that they all had some strategy they were working in line with. So I'm sure we can all agree that communication has become all the more important as the world fights through this health pandemic. With most activities shutting down, people now practicing social distancing. This is probably the most testing time for most brands to connect and communicate with their audience. In fact, building a connection with your audience at this time has become more difficult. I'm sure you can all attest to that fact. And with now some even shutting down the universities, it has really brought a lot of difficulty when it comes to trying to connect and communicate with your customers. The period has brought the need for us to be a lot more creative in crafting the message we need to send to our target audience.
Sorry, hello, Dr. Akushika Ando. Just a minute, sorry. We've been having some lags. So if you can kindly switch off the video so that we have a smooth flow. I think the internet is not so strong. So if you can kindly switch off the video so that we have a smooth flow, it will be very good. Thank you so much.
Okay, can I move on, please?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, so I was saying that consumer behavior, on the other hand, our customers, on the other hand, have also undergone a lot of changes. Their tastes and preferences have also changed because of the era we find ourselves in. And this has caused relevance on the market. And so as communicators or as PR persons, during the pandemic, there are certain things we need to focus on. And I was so happy listening to all the cases that almost all the cases mentioned the fact that they had social media, they effectively use social media, which is very, very important. So social media is now the order of the day being used to increase the brand's visibility. through creative content to meet the different needs of our customers. And I was happy to hear Mrs. Stella Amwa mentioning the use of social media and how it has impacted the case from South Africa, from Egypt. I mean, clearly shows the role social media has played. And our focus here, our interest here is that yes, social media should be used, but more importantly, it should be used to increase our brand visibility so that we remain top of mind in the customer's mind. Secondly, there should be a different approach to our face-to-face services. A different approach to our face-to-face services. In fact, that one was also evident in some of the cases that we just listened to. The fact that there should be some social distancing and all that has prevented us from meeting each other face-to-face. And now these days, all these services are now done remotely. These services are now done remotely. So as institutions, as organizations, the force now behoves on us to help our customers, to educate our clients, our students, our employees on the use of these social media platforms. So in as much as we are changing the face-to-face interaction into a remote one, we must also use the social media to educate our users on the new approach. Secondly, we must also use these social media platforms to also educate them about the pandemic and its preventive measures. Very, very important. Thirdly, we talk about communication now needs to be more empathetic than ever. Our brands needs to be more understanding. Our brands need to be more like our trusted partners, like our wives, like our husbands. Our brands needs to be more like our family members. Brands these days must also help educate customers because this will help build and retain trust with our audience. Brands must also need to pay more attention to the engagement. It is very, very important during this pandemic that as brands, we need to ensure that we are paying close attention to customer engagement online. We must also understand the fact that customer choices have changed. And so there's a need for us as communicators to also communicate what we intend to give to the customer, what offerings we are giving to them, because the communication is what will drive their behavior towards our brand. And so we must state clearly what we intend to give to them. So when you talk of communication, there are three main things you need to focus on: the use or the effective use of social media, the different approaches when it comes to face-to-face services, which are now being done remotely, and we should also use the platform, the social media platform, to educate them on how to use these new approaches, and then finally educate them on the pandemic as well. Then finally, we spoke about communication that needs to be empathetic. We need to put ourselves in the shoes of our customers, in the shoes of our students, in the shoes of our employees. We need to be empathetic to them. Now we will look at 4 main steps to communicate effectively. I was also very glad when I heard almost all the cases speaking about the fact that they realigned their communication strategy. It's very, very important. I think from beginning, I'm sure from last year, preparing our communication strategy for the year 2020. We never thought of the fact that there will be any. So as we find ourselves in this situation, to realign our communication strategy. Secondly, we need to communicate with our internal customers. Who are our internal customers in the university? Our staff, our employees. All these people are our internal customers. When we ask, why should we even communicate with our internal customers? Why? They are the people who come into contact with our external customers, who are our students. And so if they believe, if they understand our communication, it makes things easier. They believe in it, they feel a part of it, they feel they have contributed, they feel thoughts have been sought from them. Their decision has been accepted. So it makes it easier for them when they are also communicating. And I think when Madam, the case from South Africa was saying, they said they have a centralized communication model. And so it just goes to tell you that even within, they have been able to come to a conclusion on how the communication should go. So as we look at the steps to communicate effectively, our second priority is to communicate with our team internally. Our third strategy, our third step is to be proactive in sharing information on what we have done, which is helping us, so that others can also learn from it. And I think that the case from University of Ghana clearly stated that they were willing to even share all the things they have done for others to also learn from it. So we need to be proactive in sharing our information on what is working for us so that others can also learn from it. And finally, be in touch with our external stakeholders. All our external stakeholders, we should communicate our strategies to them. We should communicate our plans to them during these times. To conclude, it's evident that crisis brand communication is all about evolving our communication as we move along. It is pertinent to keep updating our stakeholders, both internally and externally, and when a new development happens. Real-time communication to identify and solve the concerns of our external stakeholders. During these times, every action we take could be good or detrimental to our brand. I'll take this again. During these times, every action we take should be good or detrimental to our brand. So we need to be extremely careful when we are communicating during these times. However, when communicating, we should use empathetic words to craft informative campaigns. This will help us reach our audience well. Our focus right now should be more on sharing factual information and educating our audience. This will be an opportunity for our brand to show that we genuinely care about our customers.
Hello, Dr. Ashika. You have 2 minutes to round up, please.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much
Hello.
for the very educative and insightful presentation. I think we've learned a lot. We are very grateful that you gave us a presentation on this topic. I think as communication patterns, branding is very critical to us, and it's even very highly important at this point, where if we are not careful, the many years we've invested trying to build a strong brand can go down, within a second. So we are very grateful for the presentation. At this time, distinguished participants, it's time for Q&A. We would want anyone who has a question to raise their hand, but as we do so, some have been made on the chat box, so I'll quickly like our presenters to speak to it. This question was directly to Mrs. Stella Amoa. I'm really fascinated by the experience of the University of Ghana, especially in the area of virtual lecture delivery. I'm really curious to know how the university was able to engage students in practical sessions in the laboratories, especially science-based courses. I don't know if she's available or if any of the speakers from your universities can speak to this question. How are they undertaking practical sessions in the laboratories, especially in terms of science-based courses? How is this being done? Like I said, this question was directed to Mrs. Amwa, but if any of the speakers, or I can add another question which really relates to how the universities dealt with fears over job losses among university staff as a result of COVID-19. How were we communicating regularly with our staff and sort of assuring them of the future? let me just add another question, which has to do with whether we got support from management in making decisions regarding to COVID-19 communications. How supportive were the management in our various universities in terms of our communication strategies that we came up with around this time? So any of the speakers can attempt responding to any of the questions. Thank you. Okay. So,
Felicia, can I come?
Yes, please go ahead.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, please.
Okay, great, thanks. I'll try to address the issue of job loss as well as support, management support. I think on the issue of job loss, there were some decisions that were made at national level where it was indicated, for example, because government institutions and institutions that are funded by government, and our university, the University of Zambia, and other public universities are all funded by government. So job losses or security for the job was guaranteed. So what was guided was that employees were supposed to be put on paid leave during the pandemic. And the other option that was given was for rotations, so that certain number of employees can report on a particular day and others would take a day off. And then there was also the issue of essential workers, because such institutions needed to continue operating despite the crisis. So all this shows that when you have a crisis communication plan in place and a crisis management plan and policy in place, it is easy to go along. But definitely for those who are in the private sector, there have been some casualties. I think some of the employees have been sent away, and some have been sent away on paid leave. Others have just been told not to be coming for work and not receiving a salary. So such situations are common. So in terms of public universities in Zambia, there's such legal provisions, and these people continue to receive their salaries, and others, those that are working from home, are also working online. And so these are the options that are available for us, and continue to sustain the university. And particularly in our time that we have, a government has allowed, there's a pronunciation by the Minister of Health to allow the final year students in all the programs to report back to campus. And so there's also another need now to continue sustaining the university and continue to give lectures, some through Zoom, and others reduced numbers in which they can meet their lecturers and course coordinators.
Okay.
For support in communication program, because there is a communication, a crisis communication team in place, and this team constitutes the senior management. In fact, the Vice Chancellor heads that communication, crisis communication team. So such strategies are supported, and also try as much to follow the guidelines that are provided at national level.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chibali, for your response to that question. We'll take one more question. Sorry.
Can I?
Okay. Is this Mrs. Stella Amon?
Yes, please.
Okay, please make your submission briefly.
Yes, thank you.
And then after her, we'll take one more question, and then we can end the session. Thank you.
Well, thank you. There was a question about how we managed our lab works in the laboratory for students. For some of the labs where it was possible to use virtual labs. So a couple of lecturers also use videos of the lab for students to watch, and then they answered their questions. So you find that there isn't one way. For some of the departments, for the final year projects, some departments ask their students to do an extensive literature review on the topic as they couldn't be in the lab. So for those who were able to go online to use the online labs, the virtual labs, they did so. And there was an option or an arrangement for those who were not able to use the virtual labs that had been created to do the extensive literature review on the topic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll take one more question. I'd be happy whether Lacia or Mrs. Stella Amma responds briefly. And this has to do with how we manage electronic rumors. If there were some information, being sent out there which were not accurate, how did we respond in our roles?
Okay, if my colleague is not responding, just to say that this is what we did by way of our news release. For example, when there was a fake news that was purported to have come from BBC that one of our students had been infected with COVID-19, it was fake news. We didn't give credence to it, so we didn't say anything. But 2 days later, when the news came that really the national source told us that one of our students had been infected with coronavirus, then we had to do a news release, provide factual information, and then inform our internal publics and external what the university's plans were. So one, just not giving credence to it because it was fake news, and the other going ahead to issue a news release and providing factual information.
Okay, thank you so much. Is Lacia available? Would you want to add a word? Okay. If she's not, then I would like to call on Ms. Nodumo Dhlamini to give the closing remarks. We want to meet the time that we set for ourselves by way of extending. You were very agreeable and you allowed us to extend it. So we really want to work within the time. If Nodumo is available, we would want to hear your concluding remarks. But thank you very much to all of you. It's been a very exciting session and we hope that we can do this again. After Nodumo speaks, I'll give some quick announcements and then we can end the session.
Thank you very much, Felicia. On behalf of the Secretary General of the Association, Professor Ehile, I would like to extend our gratitude to all the participants that attended this webinar today. We are pleasantly pleased that at some point we had 179 people connected, and we look forward to engaging you further. And as practice, of course, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar and the relevant slides that were presented by the speakers. We encourage you to continue doing the good work that you are doing. And I personally have learned a lot from the different presentations that were done today. And I think you will all agree with me that it's been very useful. So thank you very much. We will see you at the next event.
Okay, thank you very much, Nodumo, for your closing remarks. At this point, I also want to add my voice by thanking all of you, thanking all the speakers for investing time to come up with your presentations, and to all the participants for joining and staying throughout the presentation. Some of you asked for certificates. We just want to say that for this particular webinar, we are not giving certificates. The format was sort of an experience sharing session. We plan to host other ones, which would be actually sort of a learning sessions, and where we would be taking particular topics and be learning on it, and at the end of it, we would give a certificate for those ones. So please watch out for those ones. We'll stay in touch with you via your email addresses that you use for the registration. Thank you. I think you would agree with me that it's been a very fruitful session, and we've been reading all your interesting comments in the chat box. You've been a very engaging participant, and we thank you so much for this session, and we hope to see you soon again. Thank you. Bye-bye. Do have a good day. I'm sorry, madam. 2 weeks to plan the wedding. I mean, you put to me, but